What happens when a peaceful day at a friend's farm spirals into an encounter with an extraordinary dog named Baron? As a mysterious bond forms between them, she soon discovers that this majestic creature is more than just a pet. He's a guide leading her toward a hidden treasure and a dark curse. But when an unsettling presence looms in her own home, the stakes rise, and the line between safety and danger blurs. Can she confront the shadows that threaten to consume her? Join us for a thrilling tale of loyalty, fear, and the unknown. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. I don't believe I'll ever forget that moment when everything began. The day I went to my friend's farm. I had gone to their ranch to find some peace, to take a break from the madness of everyday life. It was early in the morning, and the air was still cool as I strolled across the land. Out of nowhere, I noticed some movement from the corner of my eye. A large black and brown dog was charging at me from across the field. My heart started pounding, a mix of fear and confusion taking hold of me. Should I run? But my feet remained frozen to the spot as I watched the imposing figure speed toward me. When the dog came to a halt, just inches from where I stood, I braced myself for the worst. Its sharp gaze pierced me, but surprisingly, there was no hostility. Only a calm, almost knowing presence. The animal's breath was heavy, its muscular body towering, yet its amber eyes were unexpectedly gentle, as though it could see right through me. Without thinking, I reached out my hand, hesitant but unable to resist the pull of this majestic creature. Before I could react, the dog raised one enormous paw and extended it to me. A lump formed in my throat as I held it, overwhelmed by the strange bond forming between us. "Ah, so you finally met Baron," my friend called out from a distance, breaking the spell. Baron, the pride of the ranch, both protector and family member. My friend spoke of his loyalty, intelligence, and his rare connection with people, but I hardly heard the words. My mind was still focused on the dog, on Baron, his steady presence and intense gaze locked on me. In that instant, I realized this was no ordinary dog. Something told me our meeting wasn't by chance. It felt as though a shift had occurred, though I didn't fully understand it yet. I knew, without a doubt, that Baron had begun to change my life in ways I couldn't yet grasp. We stood there for a while, locked in a silent exchange. What he communicated through his eyes was even more powerful than any words. In that brief moment, you could sense the years of experiences and emotions he had lived through. Time seemed to stand still, even though my heart raced. But instead of fear, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was then that I realized Baron wasn't just any dog. He was a soulmate. I don't think I had ever felt such a profound connection with an animal before. I never imagined that so much depth could be conveyed through a dog's gaze. I didn't pull my hand back. Instead, as I gently held Baron's large paw, it felt as though we were beginning to understand one another on a deeper level. My mind was scattered, but one thing was clear. The bond I shared with Baron was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My friend's voice brought me back to the present, saying, "He's a true friend, the kind of friend everyone needs." But in that moment, I didn't hear his words. I only saw Baron, powerful, graceful, and yet mysterious. It was as though he was trying to communicate something to me, but I couldn't quite figure it out. My thoughts were torn between my own confusion and the silent message in Baron's eyes. That huge, charismatic dog wasn't just an animal. He was a friend, a guide. I was certain that this deep, strange connection between us would change my life. For a while, Baron and I simply stood there on the farm, staring at each other. I had no idea what to do, but in that moment, it felt like everything was falling into place. His presence gave me both peace and confidence. Despite his immense size, I didn't feel the slightest fear. He felt more like a friend, an angel. It was as if I had known him for years. After a while, Baron's gaze sharpened, as though he had something important to share with me, but it was so complex that no words could capture it. At that moment, I realized how rare and extraordinary my relationship with Baron was. It wasn't just about having a dog. It was about having a companion who helped wash away my fears and doubts. Suddenly, he tilted his large head to the side and took a few cautious steps toward me. His movements were slow and deliberate. There was no rush. He was taking his time, and that simple act made me feel even closer to him. There was nothing threatening in his eyes. On the contrary, they filled me with warmth and assurance. Baron's presence seemed to break down the barriers inside me. He wasn't just a dog, he was a true friend. At the same time, I couldn't help but wonder, does such a dog really exist? He was so human in his sensitivity and understanding that I suddenly felt incredibly comfortable with him. In that moment, I felt stronger and more secure than I ever had. That enormous dog wasn't just a physical presence. He also had an emotional strength that made me feel safe. As time passed, I began to notice that every action he took seemed to hold some significance. Each step, each glance, each pause, it all had purpose. It became clear that Baron was more than just a dog. He was a protector, a teacher, a friend, and he seemed to be teaching me something beyond words. After that initial connection, the bond between Baron and me only grew stronger. But little did I know that this magnificent creature was about to lead me into something I couldn't have predicted. It was no longer just a friendly encounter. It felt as though Baron had a mission for me. That afternoon, as we walked through the fields, something changed. Baron, who had been calm and playful, suddenly froze. His head snapped up, his ears alert, and his eyes scanned the horizon. His entire body tensed, muscles rippling beneath his fur. The shift in his demeanor was immediate, and it sent a chill down my spine. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing, just the same peaceful landscape we had been enjoying moments before. But Baron seemed to know something I didn't. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was overthinking it, but then Baron sprang into action. Without warning, he shot off across the field, his powerful limbs moving with speed and purpose. I froze. Should I follow him? My instincts told me to go, so I began running after him. Baron didn't look back. He just kept running. His body kicked up dust as he sped across the field. By the time I reached the edge and saw him disappear into the trees, my heart skipped a beat. A wave of curiosity and anxiety washed over me. I had no idea where he was going or why, but one thing was clear. Something was wrong. I pushed myself harder to keep up, but Baron's speed was incredible. When I reached the trees, I could barely make him out through the thick underbrush. Then, I heard a distant, unnerving sound. A low, almost inaudible voice coming from deep within the forest. Baron stopped, his ears twitching. He turned to look back at me, his eyes dark and intense, as though telling me to stay close and follow him. With Baron leading the way, I stepped into the dense forest. The air felt heavier here, and the towering trees whispered in the wind. The sunlight barely pierced the canopy, casting eerie shadows on the ground. My heart raced as I struggled to keep up with Baron, who moved with purpose, as if he knew exactly where he was headed. We ventured deeper into the forest, the sound of rustling coming from all directions. Baron, ever alert, slowed his pace, lowering his head and tensing his body. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stood frozen, sensing an unsettling presence in the air, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Then, without warning, Baron halted. His eyes locked on something far in the distance. I followed his gaze through the dense forest and spotted a small, dilapidated cabin. It appeared abandoned, as if no one had lived there for many years. The door hung loosely from its hinges, and the windows were dark, covered with dirt and grime. Yet, it wasn't the state of the cabin that drew my attention. It was the strange, faint sound coming from within. I felt a strong pull toward it, a mixture of curiosity and dread. Baron remained unfazed, standing completely still, his gaze unwavering, as if he already knew what awaited us inside. The hairs on my arms stood up, but I knew I had to follow him. Whatever was happening, Baron had led me here for a purpose. The closer we got to the cabin, the more uneasy I felt. I could hear the creak of the old wood under Baron's feet, but there was no other sound. No birds singing, no wind rustling through the trees. The silence was overwhelming, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Baron was unbothered, his eyes fixed firmly on the cabin as he moved forward with quiet determination. Meanwhile, a strange weight pressed on my chest. When we reached the entrance, Baron positioned himself in front of the door, his body poised and ready. I glanced around nervously, feeling the heavy air closing in around me. What were we about to find? I hesitated, but Baron gave me a brief glance, almost as if reassuring me. His calm demeanor felt like a silent promise that everything would be fine, though I wasn't so sure. I took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. It groaned in protest, and I flinched at the sound. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. The air smelled of decay and abandonment, making it clear that no one had lived there for a long time. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, something caught my attention. A movement in the corner of the room. Without hesitation, Baron stepped inside, and I followed close behind. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and I glanced back at the door, but it was too late. We were already inside. The room appeared empty, save for some dusty, cobweb-covered furniture. However, in the far corner, there was something else. A faint, moving shadow. As I moved deeper into the cabin, my heartbeat quickened, and I felt enveloped by the silence, broken only by Baron's steady breathing and the creaking floorboards beneath our feet. The shadow stirred again, and this time, I saw it more clearly. A faint movement, as though something was slowly shifting. My hand trembled as I reached for the old, weathered flashlight in my pocket and switched it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the corner where I had seen the movement. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a pile of discarded blankets, but soon I noticed something strange. There was something beneath them, a small object that gleamed faintly in the dim light. My curiosity surged, and I moved toward it slowly, my mind racing with questions. What could it be? Why was it hidden in this forgotten cabin? Baron stayed close by my side, his watchful eyes never leaving the area. I knelt down, carefully clearing away some of the old blankets, revealing a small wooden chest. It was old, its surface scratched and worn from years of neglect, yet it seemed out of place in the otherwise rundown room. I gently touched the lid, and as I did, a strange chill passed through me. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid slowly, the hinges creaking under the pressure. Inside, I found something I hadn't expected. A stack of brittle, yellowed papers and a small tarnished key. The papers were fragile, their edges curled from age, but the key seemed to shine in the faint light as though it had been waiting for this moment. Baron stepped forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed at the chest. I could feel his presence, and the energy in the room shifted slightly, as though he understood the significance of the chest, like he had known about it all along. I took the key in my hand, my mind racing with possibilities. What could it unlock? Was it connected to the strange happenings surrounding the cabin? I unfolded one of the papers carefully. The writing was old but still legible, resembling a journal entry. My eyes quickly scanned the words, but then I froze. The text spoke of a hidden treasure, a secret buried deep within the forest, guarded by a loyal protector. The meaning was clear. Someone had hidden something valuable here, and Baron's presence was no coincidence. He had led me here for a reason, but that reason wasn't entirely clear yet. As I continued reading, a sense of unease settled into my chest. The journal entry didn't only speak of treasure, it also warned of a curse passed down through generations. The treasure was cursed, and those who sought it were doomed to face unimaginable danger. The more I read, the heavier the warning felt. Had I stumbled upon something much larger than I could comprehend? Was Baron's loyalty to this place born out of devotion, or was he here to protect something more? The thought gnawed at me, but I couldn't stop reading. I had to know more. At the same time, an eerie feeling of presence began to seep into the cabin. It felt as though the walls were breathing. The silence became unbearable, and I looked up from the journal, meeting Baron's gaze once again. His eyes were filled with an unearthly concern, as though he was trying to communicate something important. My fingers clenched around the key, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the air thickened with an unseen presence. Baron, usually so composed, appeared tense and alert. His ears were pinned back, and his eyes focused on something I couldn't see. I turned my head, scanning the cabin, my heart racing as I sensed my rising anxiety. A shiver ran through me, and I closed the journal, trying to process everything I had read. The treasure, the curse, the guardian. What did it all mean? I glanced back at the small chest, its dark corners looming over me. The key in my hand suddenly felt much heavier. as though it were connected to something far darker than I could understand. The journal had mentioned a hidden room, a place where the treasure was locked away. The key had to be for that very room. But if the treasure was cursed, what was I about to unlock? What could be hidden beneath this cabin, in this seemingly deserted forest? Why had Baron brought me here? Was it fate? Or was there something more? A sudden rustling sound behind me made my spine stiffen. I spun around but saw nothing. Baron, however, had already moved into position, his body tense and ready for action. His gaze was fixed on the dark doorway leading deeper into the cabin. My throat tightened as I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. I was no longer alone in this place. Something or someone was lurking in the shadows with us. "Baron, what's going on?" I whispered, but he didn't respond. The dog only stared ahead, unblinking. The tension in the room thickened, and I realized with a sinking feeling in my chest that something was about to happen. I began to realize that Baron wasn't just shielding me from an old forgotten secret. He was protecting me from something far more dangerous, something that had been lying in wait in the darkness for an immense period of time. The floorboards creaked behind me, and I turned slowly, every muscle in my body bracing for whatever might be there. At first, there was nothing but the shadows, but as I stood, I noticed a slight movement. A figure, a dark outline barely visible in the dim light. It stood motionless, observing me. My breath caught in my throat as the shape gradually began to take form. The figure was tall and dressed in ragged clothing, its face hidden in the darkness. I froze. The journal had spoken of a guardian, a figure that had watched over the treasure for centuries. Was this it? Was this the protector? Or was it something else entirely? Baron growled low, a deep rumble that echoed throughout the cabin. He moved towards the figure, his posture tense, teeth bared. The shadow seemed to react, shifting slightly, its presence becoming increasingly ominous with every passing moment. I stood frozen, my mind scrambling to comprehend what was happening. But the more I stared, the more I realized this wasn't just a man. It was something far older, something ancient. The shadow took a step forward, and with that movement, the temperature in the room dropped even further. My breath fogged in the air, and I saw Baron's muscles tense, ready for a fight. But I wasn't sure what we were facing. Was this the curse coming to life? Was this the true guardian of the treasure? Baron stepped in front of me, positioning himself between me and the figure, his eyes locked onto it with unwavering intensity. It was as if he was daring it to make a move, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't facing this alone. Baron would protect me, just as the journal had foretold. But the question remained. What was I about to unlock, and would we survive the consequences? The air in the cabin was thick with tension. Baron stood firm, his body taut, ready for whatever would come next. The shadowy figure remained silent, its presence overwhelming, filling the room with an eerie coldness. Strange whispers seemed to echo from the walls, as though the cabin itself was alive with ancient energy. The figure moved slowly, its eyes fixed on Baron. It wasn't human. This was something older, something connected to the forest's curse. It hit me then that Baron wasn't just protecting the treasure. He was guarding something far more significant. The figure extended its hand toward Baron in a clear challenge. Baron growled fiercely, positioning himself between me and the figure. The room seemed to pulse with a heavy energy, as if the final moment was upon us. The challenge had begun, and I wasn't just fighting for treasure. I was fighting for my life. As the confrontation reached its climax, Baron and I stood united against the ancient figure. The air felt heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets, and the cabin seemed to vibrate with that energy. Baron, with unwavering loyalty, defended not just me, but the truth buried deep in the forest. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the treasure had never been about wealth. It had always been about knowledge and a long-forgotten curse. The figure's presence was a test. One Baron had been preparing me for all along. The final act of the challenge ended not in violence, but in understanding. The curse was broken, and the forest was freed. Baron's loyalty and bravery had saved not only me, but also revealed the truth. As we left the forest, our bond had grown beyond words, unspoken, yet unbreakable. It wasn't just a dog I had met that day. He was a protector, a guide, and a friend. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, one of those monotonous days that blended into the endless routine of suburban life. A day when nothing out of the ordinary was expected to happen. Earlier, Daniel had called, his voice weary but apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said, the sound of papers shuffling faintly in the background. "I have to stay late again. There's a report due and it can't wait." I tried to hide my disappointment with a cheerful tone. "It's fine, really. Just don't overdo it, okay?" "I love you," I added softly. His words were filled with affection, but also guilt. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it, though a trace of loneliness lingered in my chest as I ended the call. Just as I was about to put my phone down, the doorbell rang sharply, breaking the silence of the house. I glanced at the clock, puzzled. It wasn't the usual time for visitors. Opening the door, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing with a leash loosely hanging from his collar, was Carter, Daniel's boss's German shepherd. I blinked, momentarily stunned. Daniel had often spoken of Carter, his intelligence, his imposing presence. But to see him standing on my porch, alone, was surreal. "Carter?" I murmured, looking around for any sign of his owner. The street was eerily quiet, with only the faint sound of rustling leaves in the air. "What on earth are you doing here?" Carter looked up at me with bright, piercing eyes, his tail wagging slightly as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I stepped aside, unsure of what else to do, and he trotted in confidently, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. "Lost, were you?" I asked aloud, reaching down to read the tag on his collar. Sure enough, it had Daniel's office address on it. "Well, I guess you're in the right place," I said, offering a nervous chuckle as I scratched behind his ears. "Let me just call Daniel." But before I could finish speaking, Carter nudged his head against my leg with surprising firmness, yet also with a strange deliberation. I couldn't help but laugh softly. The tension was so unexpected. Okay, I'll get you some water first." On my way to the kitchen, I filled a cup and turned around, only to find Carter standing uncomfortably nearby, his intense gaze fixed on me. For a moment, I hesitated. The air in the room felt heavy and stagnant. "Here you go," I said, setting the cup down, but Carter ignored it. Instead, he approached, his body language unreadable yet unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked nervously, a sense of dread creeping into my voice. Before I could react, Carter pressed against me, his warm, hard body pushing me gently against the counter. My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of fear washed over me. "Carter, stop," I whispered, my voice shaky, but he didn't stop. His movements were slow and deliberate, blurring the line between comfort and something darker, something I couldn't quite grasp. My mind raced, filled with confusion, fear, and a vague sense of something ominous. Time seemed to stand still, each moment dragging on in a surreal blur. I felt my legs go numb, my voice lost somewhere in my throat. When the moment finally passed, I collapsed to the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face. Carter stood a few feet away, his expression calm and serene as if nothing unusual had happened. I stared at him, heart pounding, the weight of what had just occurred pressing down on me. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare answer. How could I explain this to Daniel? Would he understand? The days that followed were grim, each one darker than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling of fear, nor could I escape the haunting memories of that night. Even though a few days had passed since the incident, the memories replayed in my mind like a broken record. The steps Carter had taken toward me, the sharp look in his eyes and the tangled emotions I had felt. I questioned whether it had all been real, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just a dream. The peace I once felt in my home was gone, replaced by a constant unease. The silence that once comforted me now felt like an enemy, whispering that something was wrong. Days passed, and Daniel continued his usual routine, staying late at work. I kept wondering if Carter was still at Daniel's office, maybe even taken in by Daniel's boss. The unsettling feeling wouldn't leave me. I couldn't stop thinking about Carter. What if he came back? What if he showed up at my door again? I considered telling Daniel about what had happened, but how could I possibly explain it? The words hovered on the tip of my tongue, yet remained stuck inside, like a knot I couldn't untangle. One evening, when Daniel arrived home from work, the usual tired expression was on his face. He opened the door and flashed me a warm smile. "How was your day?" he asked, his tone flat. I knew I had to respond, but the words that came out felt foreign to me. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. As I listened to him talk about his day, my mind wandered far away. What had Carter done to me? Or more accurately, what had I felt in that moment? Was it real? Or had my mind made it up? Sometimes I thought I had imagined it, but other times the weight of it felt so real, crushing me under its presence. Either way, guilt lingered. At night, when Daniel was asleep, the silence in the house grew more oppressive. His steady breathing offered a small measure of comfort. But that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a faint noise from the kitchen. At first, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me, but then the sound repeated. It was like footsteps. Could Carter have returned? Or was it just the wind? My heart raced, but a wave of courage began to rise within me. I couldn't live with this uncertainty any longer. I carefully got out of bed, careful not to wake Daniel, and left the room. I grabbed a knife, not as a weapon, but just to feel safer. I tiptoed toward the kitchen, holding my breath. I flicked on the lights, but the kitchen was empty. Everything was in its place, as if no one had been there at all. But that didn't ease my fear. I put the knife down and took a deep breath. The silence felt heavy, reflecting only fear. I looked out the window, feeling like I was searching for something in the dark. There was nothing there, but something deep inside me told me otherwise. It might just be a coincidence. Maybe I'm just tired, I muttered to myself, but the uneasy feeling inside wouldn't allow me to rest. Carter's gaze, the way he made me feel that night, lingered in my mind, a silent threat that wouldn't go away. The next morning, while reading the newspaper at breakfast, Daniel walked toward me. "I'll be home early tonight. We can do something together," he said, his words sincere but difficult given his busy schedule. I forced a smile and nodded. "That sounds great," I said, but my mind was elsewhere. Did I really hear those noises in the kitchen last night? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I thought about telling Daniel everything, but I couldn't. Even the thought of mentioning Carter's name made me panic. Maybe I needed to handle this myself. One thing was certain. No matter how much I tried to run, Carter would be back. After that event, I felt like I was losing control of everything, but I had to keep going. Every morning, I got up, did the housework, cooked, cleaned, and even tried to read. But no matter what I did, my mind always wandered back to Carter. His intense gaze flashed before my eyes, and the weight of that night pressed down on my chest like a boulder. I whispered to myself, "This isn't normal." But even those whispers couldn't silence the fear within me. During this time, Daniel didn't notice a thing. He went to work, stayed late, and came home exhausted, slumping in front of the TV. Then one day, the phone rang. It was Daniel's boss. His voice was cold and distant, as if this was just another routine task for him. "Carter escaped from the office today," he said. "Maybe Daniel has mentioned it, but sometimes he tends to head toward your house. If he bothers you, please let me know." As soon as Carter's name left his lips, my heart began to race. It felt like the phone might slip from my hands. Struggling to hide the tremor in my voice, I said, "Of course, I'll let you know." But even my voice betrayed me, laced with undeniable fear. When I hung up, I took a deep breath, but even the air filling my lungs felt insufficient. I looked out the window. The wind gently swayed the trees, and the sun tried to peek through the clouds. But no matter how peaceful the view seemed, my unease only grew. In the distance, I saw a shadow. It moved so quickly that I couldn't be sure of what it was. But my gut screamed, "Carter's back." I rubbed my eyes and looked again. But this time, there was nothing. I whispered to myself, "No, this can't be just a coincidence." All day, I was on edge. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat, and every little sound made me jump. By evening, when Daniel came home, he looked tired, but still managed to smile at me. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice casual. What could I say? "Everything's fine," I replied, just like every other day. But even my voice betrayed me. Daniel raised an eyebrow but quickly changed the subject. Sometimes his lack of attention frustrated me, but in that moment, it was a relief. I didn't want him to ask too many questions. That night, as I lay in bed, the cold echo of the phone call still lingered in my ears. I knew Carter had escaped from the office, but why now? Why had his boss warned me? And most importantly, why had simply hearing Carter's name filled me with such intense fear? The questions twisted in my mind, tangled and unresolved. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a faint sound from outside the bedroom. At first, it was so quiet that I thought it must have been the wind. But then it came again, louder. Someone, or something, was moving through the house. Daniel was deeply asleep, and I opened my eyes, lifting myself from the bed. I felt that undeniable sense of fear. Is it Carter? How could he possibly have come here? I got up and slowly walked to the door, which opened into an empty hallway. I squinted into the darkness. My hand reached for the light switch, and when I flipped it on, the hallway was still empty. But something in that moment made it clear. I wasn't alone in this house, even if it seemed that way to anyone else. I stood there for a while, listening to the silence, my heart pounding, breath quickening as I kept the darkness at bay. Eventually, I returned to the bedroom, slipping under the covers again. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, Carter's gaze still fresh in my mind. Was this darkness caused by his presence? Did it go deeper, brewing something nameless inside me? I couldn't shake the feeling. Carter was coming back. I knew it. It was powerful, undeniable, and echoed in the corners of my mind. It's not over yet. His presence seemed embedded in the walls of the house. All day I watched for shadows, for every tiny movement. When I looked out the window, I felt like his eyes were watching me from outside. I told myself it wasn't true. But fear doesn't listen to reason. I was truly afraid. That night, Daniel was away on business. Alone in the house, a shiver ran down my spine. I found being alone unbearable. I had no choice but to close the curtains, turn off the lights, and head to the bedroom. I tried to read, but the words on the page were just a blur. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the hallway and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. It was a weak attempt to comfort myself, to feel a little safer. As I approached the door, I held my breath. I didn't know what was behind it, but deep down, I was certain it was Carter. My fingers shook with fear as I unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. And there he was. His appearance was nothing like the calm and collected man I had encountered before. In his place stood someone I could barely recognize. His eyes were filled with hostility and darkness, and he stared at me with intense focus. There was a menace in his gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. My throat went dry, but somehow I managed to speak. "Leave," I said, though my voice lacked the strength I'd hoped for. I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Carter didn't move an inch. He just kept staring at me, unblinking. The only sound I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. "What do you want?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He stood there, motionless just outside the door. Even his breathing was quiet. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Were his hands in his pockets? Was he hiding something? My mind raced with countless possibilities. For a moment, I considered slamming the door, but the look in his eyes froze me in place. It felt like his presence had a purpose, something beyond merely frightening me. But what that purpose was, I couldn't figure out. After what seemed like an eternity, Carter turned and walked into the darkness without a word. What I felt wasn't relief. I knew this wasn't over. I closed the door, but the fear inside me didn't fade. It stayed as strong as ever. That night, I tried not to sleep. I sat in the living room, flashlight in hand, waiting for morning. My eyes darted to the door constantly, every nerve on edge at the slightest sound. Time moved painfully slowly. Every second felt like an hour. When daylight finally arrived and the house was bathed in light, the unease didn't go away. Just the thought that Carter could be near, that he could return at any moment to find me, kept my mind in a state of terror. He had been so close, just feet away, and had looked me in the eye. In that moment, he had trapped me. I didn't know how long this fear would last, or how long I would be haunted by it. But one thing I knew for sure. This was just the beginning. I wanted to tell Daniel, but what could I say? Your boss's dog is scaring me? The absurdity of that sentence kept me silent, but the weight of the fear, guilt, and confusion inside me became unbearable. At dinner that night, Daniel studied me cautiously. You seem a bit off lately. Are you okay? My response came quickly. I'm fine, just tired. But even I knew it wasn't convincing. I sensed he might see through the lie. At that moment, my eyes shifted to the window next to the dining table. There, standing outside near the house, was Carter, staring directly at me. That gaze, the one burned into my memory, made my blood run cold. My face drained of color and I dropped my spoon. Daniel looked at me, confused, but didn't say anything. Carter turned away as though nothing had happened and disappeared into the night. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Carter wasn't just trying to frighten me, he was invading my mind. This was no longer just a physical threat. It was the beginning of a psychological battle. The night grew unnaturally quiet. Daniel wasn't home. He'd texted to say he'd be staying at work overnight, as usual. His message included an apology and a suggestion to make weekend plans, but his absence didn't leave me feeling alone. It left me alone with my fears. A nameless dread gnawed at me, keeping me on edge. After midnight, the worst happened. The scratching at the door. This time, though, it was different. More urgent, more forceful. Carter had returned. My heart pounded as I peeked through the curtains. There he was again, his eyes shining like headlights in the dark, drilling into me. I shook, forcing myself to lock the door, turn off the lights, and try to ignore him. But the scratching grew louder. Through the glass, I could see his shadow clearly. This was no longer the behavior of an animal. I tried to endure it, taking deep breaths to calm myself, but the relentless scratching wore me down. Something inside me snapped. Fear, anger, and a twisted sense of determination pushed me toward the door. What do you want from me? I shouted as I flung the door open. Carter stood there unmoving, his eyes fixed on mine. Those sharp, intense eyes held me in place like a magnet. This time, he wasn't restless or overtly aggressive. He was calm, and that was somehow more terrifying. There was a quiet, unspoken resolve in his presence. Slowly, he stepped inside. He moved so close that I had no space to retreat. My eyes couldn't leave his. There was something deeper in his gaze than anything animalistic. It was something stronger, something I couldn't understand. While my heart raced wildly in my chest, another feeling began to stir. Something dark, something I couldn't control. Carter, stop, I said, my voice shaky and weak. But there was no hesitation in his actions. He stepped even closer, as if trying to communicate something he couldn't express in words, but wanted me to feel. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Time seemed to stop. His eyes deepened, pulling me in like a vortex. I wanted to scream, to panic, but I couldn't. The fear slowly gave way to an odd sense of acceptance, as though I had no choice but to surrender to his presence. I don't know how long it lasted, but at some point, Carter took a step back. Without saying a word, he turned and walked out the door. By morning, it was as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of him. But deep down, I knew something inside me had irrevocably changed. Carter wasn't just a physical threat. He had become a shadow, haunting my mind. A dark presence looming over me. That morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a face I didn't recognize. Dark circles hung under my eyes, and my expression was hollow, empty. I asked myself one question. Should I tell Daniel everything, or keep this secret forever? But one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. Carter wasn't just a man. He was a manifestation of darkness, and the cost of fighting him would be steep.